Hello, and thank you for joining today's keynote as part of the Future of Work series, brought to you by the ILR School at Cornell University in partnership with eCornell. I'm Chris Wofford, and I'll be turning things over to our panel in just a moment, but first I have a few tips for you viewers. We'd love for you to join the conversation today, so if you'd like to submit questions for the panel, simply open up the chat dialog box right up here at the top of your video player. A couple other quick notes. This event is being recorded and will be available at the same URL afterward, shortly after. We'll just run some quick edits. The recording's available. You can share freely with any colleagues or friends who may have missed today's event. So now, please join me in welcoming Jessica Garcia, who is assistant to the president of the at the Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union, the RWDSU. We'll probably be referring to it throughout. We also have Chewy Shaw, who is vice chair and site reliability engineer for the Alphabet Workers Union at Google. And finally, dean of the ILR School and Scheinman professor Alex Colvin from Cornell University. Now I'm going to fade back and join you all in the chat. Just a quick heads up, I will be dropping several key resources and URLs throughout, which will be referred to in the conversation, so heads up for that. Without too much more fuss, now, Dean Alex Colvin, I'll let you please take it away. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks very much, Chris, and welcome to everybody. Really glad to have you joining us today. I think we're in for a great conversation. I'm really pleased to have our two guests today, Jessica Garcia and Chewy Shaw. They're right at the heart of some of the most interesting things going on in labor in America today. The organizing in the tech industry has been one of the really interesting and important surprises, I think, in labor in recent years, and the work going on with the Alphabet Workers Union is a really important part of that. And then currently, the organizing at the Bessemer facility of Amazon in Alabama is really the central labor relations event going on right now in America. And Jessica's union is obviously right at the center of that. So they really are the perfect guest to have today to be talking about what's going on in labor in America today. If we think back over the course of our history, at ILR, we've been studying issues of labor relations. We're the world's leading school of work for the last 75 years. We've been educating students, training professionals, conducting research on important issues. But I think in America, issues of labor have become really central in the last couple of years. Again, we've seen a resurgence of interest in what's going on with unions and representation in the workplace. We saw the emergence of the Fight for 15 campaign that's really transformed the national conversation around minimum wages. We saw the Red for Ed teacher strikes really bringing to the fore concerns of teachers in states across the country. We saw conflicts over workplace health and safety issues under COVID this past year, where workers were standing up for concerns about their safety and health. And we've seen conflicts over the status of gig workers, something that is a very contentious issue and has been the subject of many public debates. We now have one of the most pro-labor presidents we've seen for a long time, and proposals to reform labor law. So a lot going on in the labor space. On to today's topic, the union organizing efforts we're seeing at big tech companies are a really important thing, I think, for labor relations and how we think about where the future of work is going to be going. If we look back at our historical experience, certainly unionization, union organizing, if we think back to the 30s and 40s, was concentrated around the major issues, the major industries of the day, autos, steel, the great manufacturing plants of that period of time. And that led to a certain traditional image of the hard hat wearing union member. Now, even at the time, that wasn't entirely true, but it's changed over time. We've seen great waves of organizing across different industries. And today we see union members being quite concentrated in industries like teaching, healthcare. Nurses are one of the most unionized groups in America today. Flight attendants, other airline workers, professional athletes, entertainment industry workers. So today's union member is very different, I think, from the stereotype we might have had from historical experience. Now, we think about the tech industry, certainly our great industry of the day. If we think about the leading companies of different eras in American history, if you go back to the 20th century, it was General Motors and General Electric that were the leading companies of the economy. Interestingly, if you look in 1950, the biggest company in America was General Motors. If you look in 2000, the biggest company in America was General Motors. Well, today, both Amazon and Alphabet are bigger than General Motors. They are the leading companies of today. And the question of what work is going to be like for the workers at those companies is really central to understand what the future of work in America is going to be like today. So the battles around representation for workers in this industry, in these major companies, is really shaping where we're going to go as a nation, how workers are going to be treated. There's a big debate going on in America about this. What is the future of labor? We think about issues like inequality in our society, the changing shape of jobs, whether jobs are going to be lost to automation. These are big questions for our future. And the conflicts going on right now about representation are about what's going to be the voice of workers in these big questions, and how are we going to shape labor relations in these key industries going forward. It's a big question for our society and something we're going to start delving into today. I'm going to start off with Jessica and ask you, Jessica, could you tell us a little about what's going on at Bessemer on the ground? We're seeing lots of media reports about this, but you're right in the heart of it. Your union's there on the ground organizing. So what's the story today about what's going on at Bessemer and what's happening there right now?
Thanks, Alex, and really thank you to the Cornell ILR School for giving us the opportunity to share what we're seeing on the ground and what we're trying to accomplish with Amazon in the Deep South. For those of you not familiar with my union, the Retail Wholesale Department Store Union represents roughly 100,000 workers across the country who work in retail, healthcare, warehousing, distribution centers, and all across the food supply chain. Last summer, our council in Alabama started getting phone calls from workers at the newly opened facility in Bessemer. This facility had been welcomed with open arms by the community because it had a promise of thousands of jobs at $15 an hour. However, just a few months later, it opened in March, and just by the summer, we were already getting calls from workers frustrated with the conditions at the facility. What they quickly learned, and the reason they were calling, is that for this company, productivity mattered a whole lot more than their own health. Their worth was being managed and valued by an algorithm that tracks their productivity and what the company calls time off task. Too much time off task, the workers would get disciplined and eventually fired if they have too many disciplines in the app. Workers reported interacting more with this app than with actual people, getting disciplined by an app, getting fired via text. They felt like they were being managed by robots and being treated like robots. And then chief among the complaints and the conditions that we were seeing and continue to see at the facility now are workers just complaining about the pace of work. One worker describes her day, just to me personally, she said, I feel like every day that I go to work, I'm in a 9-hour workout in extreme heat with just 2 30-minute breaks. And so it's no surprise that turnover at Amazon facilities are over 100% every year. And another big issue for them was access to bathrooms. They're working in facilities that are 16 football fields large, and just getting to a restroom takes a long time, and that time gets counted against them as time off task. And so we hear reports, and you see it in the news, of workers having to relieve themselves in bottles rather than risk going to the restroom and potentially getting fired. And then during the pandemic, what we saw with the workers was lack of communication and lack of letting workers know of whether they might have been exposed to COVID, and all they were getting were alerts of there being an incident in the facility. And we know that Amazon has a horrible health and safety record already. There's already been reported and documented the extreme level of 911 calls for workers having suicidal tendencies. There's been reports of injuries and deaths at Amazon facilities. And no surprise for us, our workers, they're limping. They're showing their injuries from the intense pace that they have to keep at work and the extreme conditions. And Amazon brags about having good paying jobs, paying $15 an hour. But the fact of the matter is that wage is lower than what we offer at our other unionized shops in Alabama. And it's lower than the median wage in the state. So and workers know that. They see that. They complain that the company tells them that they should be happy to be earning what they're earning because the cost of living in Alabama is so low. Therefore, what are they complaining about? And then they claim that they have amazing benefits, but workers will say getting access to those benefits is incredibly hard. They have to read the fine print. One worker even went so far as to tell me that she learned more by joining a Facebook group of Amazon workers to learn what benefits are available to her and how to work around the Amazon system than actually talking to HR. So I wanted to share the conditions that led to them organizing, because the company has really made a big case about how they're amazing and workers don't need a union. They can come to us directly, but workers really are seeing the other picture. And so we filed for an election in January. The NLRB gave us 7 weeks for voting. We are in the last stages of that. We have a few more days of voting left. And we don't know what the results are going to be, quite honestly, because the company has launched an extreme anti-union campaign throughout this whole time. They've bombarded workers with anti-union messaging from the beginning, from receiving 5 to more texts a day, with signage, banners all over the facility, even in the bathroom stalls when they go and sit down, with voting no messages. Their captive audience meetings that they were required to go a couple of times a week were filled with just massive misinformation about what it means to be in a union. And whenever people spoke out or asked a question, they were targeted for one-on-one meetings after the meeting to, assess where they were and get a sense of how they were going to vote, and again fill in with misinformation. So it's been quite challenging. They've been utilizing a lot of really sketchy tactics to keep the union out. Clearly, they recognize this as a massive threat, us being in there. Nevertheless, I have to say that right now, what we're seeing and what we're hearing from the ground is just an extreme level of enthusiasm. Workers are really excited. They're honking their horns as they're exiting the facility. The community has just been incredible rallying around the workers. The Black Lives Matter organizations have really highlighted the fact that this is not just a workers' rights issue, it's a civil rights issue. This is a predominantly Black facility in a predominantly Black city, in a predominantly Black state. And the fact that these are the conditions that workers should be satisfied having, working for one of the richest men in the world, is really coming to the forefront. And really the support also just from labor. Alabama has such rich history in labor, and we have benefited from that. We've had so much support from the unions on the ground already, and those who had been on the ground before and have members who are now retired or used to be union members. And a lot of the members who we're talking to now, or a lot of the workers we're talking to now, used to be UAW members and at other facilities that have now closed. So to bring it all to a close and just to update you, it's really exciting. We don't know how things are going to work out. The vote ends March 29th. If the vote were held today, we would feel really confident in a victory, but it really will depends on when people voted and how much information they had about the union and Amazon. And we're just in a wait and see moment. The vote could take a few weeks to count. It's 5,800 workers. And each vote has to be counted one by one. And so it's going to take a few days. Win or lose, though, I have to say that we really feel very proud of the work that's been done down there, the work that the workers have really done in organizing each other and educating each other, and also the work that we've done just to really bring unionization to the dialogue. The fact that we have our president talking about workers' rights and a workers' right to organize is just amazing. And this is just the beginning of what we hope will be a strong movement to advance workers' rights in the U.S.
Yeah, just to your last point there, I think one of the things that to a lot of us who study labor relations that's been really interesting about this is that we know across America about when we do surveys, about half of workers say they would like to have union representation. But we know that only a little under 11% of workers currently are represented by unions, and that talk about a representation gap where it's hard to achieve that desire for union representation. And in many ways, we often think of the South as a particularly hard place to organize. I know your union has a history of organizing across the country in different locations. And I'm interested, what was it about these workers at Bessemer, and why here, why now? Why is this the place that we're seeing this very significant organizing effort?
The opportunity was there. The workers were very frustrated. It's possible that the pandemic really exacerbated the situation. One of the things that it was immediately happening when workers approached us, the company had been offering hazard pay to workers. They started doing hazard pay, I believe, in early in the pandemic, and they quickly took it away. And so by June, it was gone. And yet it was the height of the pandemic, and workers were they didn't come to us complaining about that, but the fact that they were in essence told they weren't essential, and they were dealing with all these other working conditions, just really exacerbated the situation for them. Why Alabama? We've been getting calls from Amazon workers across the country for a while now. Our union was involved in keeping Amazon accountable when they tried to come to New York City to build their second headquarters. And we had been organizing workers in New York and in the area in talking to them really for a while. But we had no idea that this campaign was going to move this quickly. When we first started talking to them, we knew it was a big facility. We thought it would take a while, but in a matter of days, we had thousands of cards signed and workers wanting to just be part of this work and be part of our committee. And so when we learned that it was a 6,000 worker facility, we had a lot of work to do to get to an election. But it was not hard to get workers on board. And so I just think the extreme conditions in the area and just the pandemic perhaps exacerbated the conditions for us to really do something there.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that we talk about Amazon as a tech company, one of the big players in the tech industry, but you're talking about basically a warehouse type facility here, and a lot of the issues you're talking about are things that we encounter in a lot of warehouse type facilities. Your union represents workers across a lot of different companies, both kind of old economy and now looking at high-tech new economy. Is what you're encountering here with Amazon in your organizing efforts sort of similar to what you encounter at other companies, or are there any differences because it's a tech company, or is it more similar?
You're right. It's a lot of the issues are very much the same. I think Amazon certainly has tried to get above things by offering a higher wage, and they potentially have better good benefits, not necessarily better benefits in a unionized place, but they're certainly trying to keep unions out by offering these things. What is really different is the lack of human contact, the level of automation that they utilize, the use of workers as if the description of feeling like a robot is not far from the truth. Workers are being used to serve a very specific function, and they have to fulfill that function over and over and over again all day, and that's all they're seen as. Your job titles are very strange. You are a storer. You are a lifter. You are. It's just like it's your function, and that's how you're defined. And in that respect, it's obviously we've seen automation, we've seen jobs specialize, but the lack of human contact, the fact that you don't even know who your supervisor is, you have to look them up on an app and you have to interact with them on an app is just certainly new to us to witness, and perhaps that is the future of work and communication in the workplace. But it's not good if what we're trying to build is community and ensure that workers are treated with dignity and respect.
I want to bring Chuy Shaw into the conversation now, and Chuy, I've been really interested, listening to Jessica's description of their experience with Amazon. You're the vice chair of the Alphabet Workers Union for. People in the audience, the Alphabet is the holding company that owns Google, so we're all very familiar with Google, obviously. When you've listened to what she's been telling about their experiences at Amazon, how does that resonate with your union's experience with Alphabet, and what are similarities or differences that you're hearing?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot kind of that's some overlap, and then some that's kind of, I think, distinct to just like where the movement really began for us. So just a little bit of context on me. I started working at Google, with the internship in 2011, and have been continuously with them since. And one of the things that I really saw over that time period was when I joined, the culture was really focused on uplifting workers' voices and giving us a space where we can speak up, and any one person can come to the weekly all hands meeting, which we call TGIF, and go up to the mic and just say whatever they want about a product, ask questions. People would come up and complain about some new feature in Maps. People complained about Google Reader getting shut down. People complained about the real names policy that was going through Google Plus at one point. And then there were a number of different types of situations where what we saw was the leaders of the company would take the time to come up with an answer for that person. If they saw growing sentiment around an issue, they would take time to really make sure we had a discussion to understand, at the very least, where they were coming from with their decisions. And in some cases, we saw workers able to actually get things to change. Now, this then, in a lot of ways, just kind of made a lot of the culture of our company then oriented around this idea that the company wants us to speak up. The company wants us to really bring up ways that we can make the products better. We ended up, as workers at one point, really pushing for a campaign of product excellence, where we started pointing out that our metrics were not looking at the experience that users are having. We want to actually care about, if we say we care about the users, we should actually put our metrics that we are measuring ourselves on based off of how the users' experiences are going through. And so, to a large extent, we, as part of our culture, just have had this kind of ingrained in us for a while. But what we started seeing over the last few years is we started seeing a few different shifts. One of the shifts that more directly mirrors kind of what's going on at Amazon is we started seeing the company really shift towards more and more contract workers, where the expectations of what type of experience they get are completely dropped. And the concept then is that there's a barrier between the company and them of a vendor company. And that vendor company then determines what their, work-life balance and all are. But at the same time, these are individuals who are only working for Google and other Alphabet companies. And so their work is very much defined by the company. And so the company's been playing this kind of weird place within contract law, trying to then make it seem more and more like more and more jobs just kind of need to be offloaded, which we've been seeing as a way of really kind of, it's similar to what Jessica was saying about how a lot of those types of jobs at the warehouses are Black and brown people. Similarly, we're seeing here a lot of the contract work ends up being mostly the Black and brown people of the company. And so then that has over time shifted to the point where now the majority of our company is contract workers. And when I started, it was 10%. And so there's just been such a growing shift towards classifying a bunch of workers as not deserving the same quality of life as the rest. And for my position as a software engineer, those parts of it weren't really affecting me directly, but that was kind of their goal. They wanted to keep us separated from really kind of feeling that difference, and just kind of kept up bringing up more and more rhetoric of how we were different and how we cannot trust anybody. They would put red badges onto contract workers and white badges onto full-timers and tell us, do not trust the people with red badges. Make sure you never have any conversations that are too work-specific around them because, they're the outsiders. And to an extent, a number of these people have been working only with our company for years. And so marking them as outsiders feels really weird, but that is how the companies wanted to start creating the separation. At the same time, we also started seeing a heavy crackdown on people who've been speaking up about different issues. I'm sure a lot of you saw the news about the women's walkout, which was a big moment where a lot of people in the company were kind of feeling like some of the conflict was starting to come to a head, where people were starting to lose trust in the idea that our executives really were interested in the experience of the workers. And in response to that, the company gave some kind words and attempted to avoid giving into any of our demands. The only way we got any of the demands from the women's walkout was a smaller subset of the people ended up continuing to pressure in Congress. And when Congress then started taking up the issue of forced arbitration, then the company realized, oh, yeah, it needs to change that policy as well. And then it stepped in line. But the company did not respond in any meaningful way to the fact that a number of workers came out and stood up. And so that was a large point where many of us started feeling like we need some more meaningful structural ways for us as workers to be able to have a say in how this company operates. And so part of it then has been kind of really focused on these workplace issues. So the women's walkout was about harassment. These contract workers were seeing similar things of like, there's a set of the workers who just are not getting the pay and experience they need. But then there's also another piece to it where part of the reason that we've had a history of activism within a company is also because a number of the people come to the company because the company described itself as a company that focuses on don't be evil. And so the idea that they can be part of a company that has a mission of making sure that our impact on the world is a positive one is a very significant reason that they chose this company specifically. And so for a number of us in that position, like as we started seeing more and more situations where it started feeling like the executives were trying to hide controversial contracts from the workers and try to just, push through them without the discussion that we were used to having on anything that was controversial, that made people get really concerned. People started internally raising these concerns, and we started seeing executive pushback. We saw at the end of 2019, 5 people get fired for internally sharing information about some controversial contracts and some controversial steps that the executives were taking. And so that showed a lot of us that the execs were now also at a point where they were willing to fire people for going against the messaging of the company and for doing so internally, just like for raising awareness, for starting to organize. And so that then also made us feel like we need a way to really protect the people who speak up. We have a number of us who, care but don't have a lot of context on a lot of these really large scale complex issues. But then with the people who do have context, we want them to be able to speak up. And part of the reason that I see it as super important is like, it feels in ways like it's kind of part of what was the problem with the Manhattan Project, where back then we had a number of scientists and researchers who were part of just what they were told was just groundbreaking physics. And then they discover that they were part of designing a bomb that killed hundreds of thousands of people. And like that is just a big shock and a big blow to just like the way that you think about what you're doing and, what your impact on the world is. And so we want to avoid, getting surprised by, oh, oops, turns out we were part of destroying lives that we care about, And so in order to be able to have a conscientious work that we are working on, we want to have the freedom to really just be able to discuss and decide for ourselves, how do we want to take part in the different projects that are coming up. And so all of that kind of pulled together into us forming a union. We spent much of 2020 doing kind of the initial organizing, started working with Communication Workers of America, the national union, to try to get some of their guidance, and they've been helping us, supporting us along the way. But they've also made it clear that we designed this to fit our company and our needs. So because of that, we're not following a lot of the common playbooks of how a lot of unions recently have been started, but we are still holding on to a lot of the older traditions of unions, where, we don't see the NLRA as being structured properly for our type of company. It talks a lot more about situations where you can have a lot of these face-to-face conversations with everybody in the building and get everyone towards a vote. Whereas our company is so spread out globally with so many different factors, like different labor laws in different places, as well as with the split between the contract workers, that then also makes it unclear exactly how to organize together as a collective, that we decided, rather than relying on going for a specific contract right away and going for a bargaining unit, it'd be better for us to just start off with how can we, as a collective force, pool our resources and our interest in making this company better and use our collective power to start really making more of a difference. And so we are keeping it kind of more of a open, experimental style, where anything that somebody finds as a possible way that we can use both the resources of membership paying dues. So we have all of our members paying 1% of their total compensation as dues. And then also with a number of people who are ready to get active, how can we use the collective unit of us trying to make a difference to be stronger than those individuals who are getting forced out of the company?
Yeah, I think that's one of the fascinating aspects of how you guys are organizing, because it goes back in some ways to the early history of union organizing in the 30s, when we saw a lot of what are often called minority unions, where you don't yet go to a point of having an election the way that the workers in Bessemer are going through an election process to show the majority support, but you still have rights as a minority union. Under the National Labor Relations Act, we have what we call the Section 7 rights to collective action that applies to any worker, whether you have bargaining rights or not. If you have a majority, then you can get the bargaining rights as are being sought at Amazon. But I think this is one of the really significant things about the experiment that you guys are doing, about trying to find a way to have representation without yet going to that point of a majority election.
And one thing I do want to add as well is that, like, we aren't against, going for a majority election. It just feels that right now the environment is set up to make us fail if we went directly for that. And the way the laws are set up are not really to support our type of situation. We would like to see the laws change to start really reflecting how companies are structured nowadays. But until that point, we're just going to use whatever tools we can, because we don't want to see the culture just fall away.
Right. Yeah. One of the things that is interesting across both your settings is that you are dealing with companies that have very broad public impacts, public profiles. I think most Americans order things off Amazon and do searches on Google. So you're dealing with a very public type of company. How does that play into organizing at these companies? How does that public interest in the companies and what's going on, how does that play into your organizing efforts? Jessica, maybe do you want to have a shot at answering that first?
Sure. To be honest with you, we have, as a union, we haven't yet gone the organizing the consumer route in support of the unionizing effort, but it really has helped that the company has so much visibility, that it has such a good reputation with consumers is challenging, because we have to do a lot of work to educate folks about how they're not perfect, and it's also complicated because yes, Amazon Prime is awesome, and we're not telling you not to use it. It's if it's effective for you, then great. But there should be some standards that we should all uphold the company to accountable to hold with our workers overall. And so with us, it's really just been more about educating or getting the public to just come along with us and be supportive of the workers and show workers that they're standing in solidarity with them, allow workers to gain strength from that support. And the fact that Jeff Bezos is one of the richest men in the world, and is paying his workers such low wages does really resonate with the public. That people don't understand that and don't support that. And so, lifting up that message. Even, I don't know if you saw, but Oxfam back in September put out a study or report analysis that if Jeff Bezos were to pay his 876,000 workers a 105,000 bonus. Back then, that $92 billion that he would pay out would still leave him, one of the top 5 richest men in the world, and would leave him at the same level of wealth that he had before the pandemic started. So he's been making a lot of money off of workers, and the income inequality message really does resonate with folks. And I would say that if anything comes out of this with the public, it's the greater awareness and us as a society just being able to demand from companies to treat all workers better is significant. And there's a lot that we can do policy-wise as a country to allow for that. And hopefully we can, as a public, also push our legislators to do that and allow workers like Chewy to organize and not require that they do so in a certain way, and put up with companies like Amazon and Google who have unlimited resources to union bust and to, basically tell workers that they don't have a right to collectively organize and stand up for themselves.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really important point about the consumer sense that you don't want to stop using Amazon Prime, but you might want to feel good about how the workers are being treated. It's a lot like the organizing we saw a few years ago around sweatshops in the garment and shoe industries. And it wasn't that people didn't want to buy Nike shoes. They wanted the Nike shoes, but they wanted to feel good about the workers in countries like Bangladesh and Pakistan who were making the products that we were buying and feeling okay about that. So I think that's a really interesting point about that relationship. Chewy, Google is both a company whose product we use all the time, and also is a company that historically has had this reputation as like a place that people want to go work at. When I ask my students to stick up their hands and say, which company in America do you want to go work for? Google is usually the company that they say most. How does that kind of public image of Google play into things for your union?
So I think it plays a number of ways, because like a large part of it is part of what has formed the culture that we have at the company. Like the fact that the company really started off with this concept of services that to the average person are free. You're not directly paying. Instead, we try to find a way to make our ad revenue subsidize. That has been really part of kind of the company to a lot of us, showing that it wants to make sure it's not creating more of these kind of classist divides in society and how it builds out different things. And we saw then, like, in our ways of kind of coming to what to expect from the company over the years, we really saw a number of signs where it really felt like the company valued the fact that it had been, one of the highest reputations among a lot of the average consumers of the big tech giants, where people did just like trust that the company was focusing in a positive direction, was actually trying to do things to help. And so that also encouraged a number of us who were the people who like got into tech and then started getting afraid of, is the tech I'm doing going to be towards harm or good, to also feel like that image is part of what drew us to it. But then also at the same time, I think it's also led to, as these controversies have started occurring, some of the executives now focusing more on the PR strategy than on what is really the correct ethical path for us as a company. And so we've been starting to see kind of there be an element of a divide there as well, where now it seems in some ways, with Dr. Timit Gebru getting fired, that to a lot of us felt like the company wants to hide research that the public will recognize. It shows that there are some flaws in the ways that we're doing things. And so in order to hide that research, they're willing to get rid of anybody who wants to tell the public too openly about the reality of the situation, that we aren't perfect, and that we're still growing. And so we've been seeing kind of an element where, to an extent, like, it started to feel like the public expectations have been something that the executives have been holding as separate from being the true kind of ethical values themselves, and more just like, how can we create a narrative about this? And then kind of, as I was saying with the women's walkout, what we saw was a really heavy PR strategy from the executives as a response but not a meaningful response to the actual complaints the workers were bringing up. And so, like, to an extent, there's kind of been a dichotomy where, on the one hand, like, we're now seeing this kind of gap widening where the way that the company tries to do public perception is by hiding the fact that the workers have complaints. But at the same time, on the other hand, with kind of the way that this is something that's a growing movement across the board of a number of people really starting to see that there is a problem with just a handful of people at the top of these tech companies making all the decisions. We're starting to see how it impacts, you know, our elections, our social dynamics, our environment. And like, there's so much that now people are starting to see of the critical need for there to be a number of voices and a number of perspectives at the table. That's also part of what we started relying on when we decided to launch kind of at the minority level. Because like, it was definitely a big, heavy discussion for us. You know, do we want to launch publicly while we're still relatively small to the company? What are going to be the costs and benefits of doing so? Because like, since we're not immediately on a race to a contract, you know, theoretically, we could have just stayed very secret in our growth for a while until we got to a much bigger size. But what we ended up deciding was that one of the strengths that we also have is because of how much the public is watching our company, it will be a big deal if the company, rather than, you know, the company's been showing that they're willing to fire 5 people in dubious ways, 2 of which that the NLRB has now ruled seem to be illegal and are pressing charges on. But like, they demonstrated that with like a handful of people, they're willing to just get rid of them. But we thought maybe if we can get to a certain size, we can at least have the density that protects us from it being a reasonable decision that, you know, will have minimal impact on productivity and on the perception. That like, if we get past a certain size, they cannot just fire all of us without it harming their objectives. And so we decided that like, starting off with around 200 would be when we'd start feeling more comfortable and start taking a bit more bolder of a step. And right around the time when we were getting there was also when the other public controversies were starting to happen with Dr. Timothy Gebru, with Margaret Mitchell, and with the NLRB ruling. That really made us feel like this was the moment for us to kind of identify ourselves and to really start forming kind of the power that we can have out of having a voice that can speak to the public as well. And so we saw some value that because the public is watching, we do have also some power in that we can speak to the hidden things. If the company is so focused on hiding things from the public, then one of the things that we can do right now is we can, as a union, start highlighting those situations that we think should be relevant to the public as well. And so there's then additional benefit for us in, you know, starting to make a difference earlier by having a direct connection with the public. But yeah, like throughout all of this, it's been kind of, there are a number of different ways that like us being such a public company has made us have to think about each step of this journey a lot more differently than if we were a much smaller company that, you know, has like maybe one noticeable press statement a year. And like, with us being someone that's constantly in the public eye, it seems like in some ways that has made the executives in some ways harsher, but then in other ways it's also given us additional power in that we can more directly rely on and count on the public to speak up with us when things really go past a certain limit.
All right. So we've started to get some questions from the audience. So I'm going to chuck you guys a few questions that we've had come in. I think there's been a lot of interest in what you've been talking about. So I'm going to start off with you, Jessica. A question came in that you mentioned these issues of sort of dignity and respect and desire for human contact amongst the workers. Has the union got plans to, if you are successful in winning representation, and how you are going to bargain about these issues? What kind of things are you looking to get into a contract to address these concerns that the workers have been raising?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We have been so busy trying to get to where we are right now that the actual terms of what we'll be bargaining for, at least I haven't sat down with the workers myself to be familiar precisely what that'll look like. But I think that the fact that it's so hard for workers to figure out who they need to be reporting to. It'll be a simple lines of communication, and how do we address that? But it'll really be up to the committee to figure all that out. And so I don't want to speak for them. I feel like right now they're just so busy trying to win this election that, once we get there, there'll be plenty of time for us to huddle and think about how we want to set those terms.
Great, thanks. A question for Chewy. So you've been giving voice to your efforts on behalf of the union. Somebody's asking, have your efforts on behalf of the union affected your career at Google? Do you feel your career has been negatively or positively impacted by this? What's been the impact for you personally?
So there are two pieces to that. One, on the one side, like from the executives, we've not seen any direct pushback. What we're seeing is they're staying pretty hands-off right now. I think my take is essentially that they are kind of waiting to see what we kind of form into. Because it's one thing to say, we are starting a union, and it's another thing to kind of see what that plays out and what types of things we really start pushing. And so far, from what I've heard, like in performance reviews, it seems managers are being told to just kind of keep their hands off. And right now we're seeing that as a sign that the company is kind of still deciding what they really want to see this look at like and mean. But I think there's also been another aspect where through organizing and through just like getting more in contact with different people in the company and more kind of really starting getting driven into what can we do, it's been a very empowering experience. And it's really helped me to kind of gain a lot more confidence in myself as a leader and in my ability to really kind of think about a lot of complexity. Like, I've been at the company a decade. I know a lot about the service that I work on, but like, there are a lot of just kind of subtle things in a workplace environment that can keep you in a mindset of thinking, oh, I just am not supposed to be focused on that. That's somebody else's job. And kind of getting past that point of like, wait a second, we don't have enough people looking at these problems. That's why they continue to be this way. And to start really getting into this mindset of, it is on us, and, it is on us to really kind of notice and see not only like how is the system starting to fall apart, but also recognizing when our coworkers, someone on our team, like, it's not enough to just assume that their manager has been taking care of all of their emotional needs and their needs as they're growing through the company. We need to actually reach out to each other. And so it's kind of been a really rewarding experience there as well, starting to kind of get to know people to a deeper level as we're now more open about discussing what are our challenges rather than just, what's the success that we can share for the week, and like really kind of digging into our lives. And then as well as like kind of starting to rethink about like my relationship with work. Just, I think in a number of ways that has already impacted in big ways that have made just like on the work that I am doing at the same time, me feel a lot more confident in how I take up the steps, and has helped me to really feel more confident in how I analyze my own process.
Great, thanks. So, Jessica, one of the issues that's always brought up in union organizing campaigns, and I'm sure you've encountered this multiple times, is the question around union dues and what's the structure on that. And somebody asked, what would be the dues and fee structure for Amazon employees joining our WDSU? How does that relate to their hourly wages? So, how about the dues question?
I feel awful that I actually don't have the details of what their particular dues would be, because there is a per capita structure that normally is adhered to. I do know that like usually the minimum that I understand is around $8 a week, and given that they're low wage workers, I don't foresee their dues being excessively high. But I don't want to speak out of turn and put a figure out there that I'm not quite familiar with. I think it'll really depend on what the unit is, and it'll be connected to their wages. But it's usually not an onerous amount, and you get amazing representation out of it. Alabama is currently a right to work state. So interestingly, workers can opt to not pay dues and still be represented by the union. And so there's a lot of different factors that'll go into each individual and what their dues will be.
Yeah, I think that's always an interesting point that, Alabama is one of the, states that's right to work. And so the key thing of a right to work law is that it means workers can't be required under the contract to pay union dues versus in non-right to work states that's negotiated in the contract. Interesting, our research on this says that overall across unions, the average is typically around sort of 1 to 2% of wages. It's often structured as an hour per week, so that's a 1/40th or every 2 weeks, so 1/80th. So the average typically is in that kind of range. That's the common thing if we look across the whole economy. Chewy, interesting question for you. Can you elaborate on how your efforts to organize might differ from traditional unions? And do you see your approach as a model for tech companies going forward? So could we see something like this at other big tech companies?
So just first to speak on dues, we're also collecting dues from people who join the union, and we set it at 1%. And we decided to try to put our focus on total compensation because that's a way that our company differentiates between salary and equity and bonuses. We decided we're going to then make it something that is more weighted based off of like the total package of the money that the company's giving to you, so that we can then have it more heavily weighted of money coming from the higher wage workers. But it's definitely also been something where we've been trying to discuss like how do we strategize around using these dues. And so I think this is like also a large part of the other question of like the ways that this differentiates us. Really I see as being one of the biggest elements is that we are not specifically just looking for a particular moment of kind of, contract negotiation to come up and then, go for another one after that. Instead, we're trying to focus immediately on kind of parallelizing and decentralizing our union. We don't really want our union to just kind of be another, bureaucratic force that people have to come through to get to other sources, but rather to be a resource hub in a way. And so a large part of our focus has been setting up different organizing committees that are able to focus on either different issues or different workplace groups. We call them workplace units. And so then that could be like the people who are working in Chrome or the people who are working on Gmail. They can come together and start focusing together to try to figure out how to organize around issues that are mattering to them at that moment. And so to a large extent, what we're putting our focus on is trying to make it as easy as possible for each of these different groups to start building campaigns and to start getting meaningful tools and resources to help them with those campaigns. But then the other thing that we've also been able to do is also go directly with some legal cases where we do see kind of, as you were saying, like the NLRA does protect the rights to organize and like to talk with your workers about workplace conditions. And so as we've been seeing some situations where the contract workers have been directly punished for just talking about workplace issues, we've actually also been able to bring in lawyers through our connections with the CWA. And so in one case with a day center worker in South Carolina, Shannon Waite, we've actually filed a ULP about how they were silencing her and they had like removed her, they suspended her. We filed that they had done this in a way that was illegal, that was specifically just because she was talking about workplace issues, and she was brought back onto site. So we were able to protect her job, and we're working on, starting to really build up the base of the different contract workers in those different sites so that they can collectively come together and speak up in protected ways. And, at the very least right now, we see that we can add some of this protection by, a lot of these cases, nobody really knows as just an individual worker who has not studied the law, has this crossed the line? Is this too much? And just having lawyers that we can get people in contact with is one of the ways that we felt like we can immediately start helping. And additionally, then as we're kind of focusing on this more decentralized process, we're hoping that this will then allow for kind of, with the scale of the company, for us to really be able to make this into something that doesn't, become just like a year-long process coming up with each new request, but instead that, there can be several streams of requests that are going on from the different workers who care, so that we can, at a much quicker rate, get the company to be at the level of equity and fairness internally and conscientiousness externally that we would like to see.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point about the role of the law there. With the PRO Act, which is the major piece of labor law reform legislation currently in Congress, being passed by the House and next to going to the Senate, one of the things it does do, as well as strengthening penalties for violations of the law, is it includes this broader definition of who's an employee, who's covered by the Act, who has the labor law rights, that really does directly address that issue you're talking about of all these contractors, and do they have the same protections if they're organizing. So, I think that's one of these areas where we really would see a big impact if the PRO Act passes. Obviously, it'll depend on the state of the filibuster, but it would make a significant difference to stuff. I think we have time for maybe one last question. I've got one for Jessica. So there's been organizing, thoughts or efforts at Amazon before, and different unions have tried stuff in the past, and certainly at other similar large companies. I think back to like Walmart organizing efforts, against fairly strong anti-union employers. What did your union learn from the past experiences of kind of other unions? What have you done that's sort of similar or different? Is there anything distinctive that you thought about you've been thinking about as a union in approaching your organizing based on the kind of lessons learned and what you've seen elsewhere in your approach?
I think one of the biggest lessons that we've learned over time is just the power of global framework agreements and working in conjunction and solidarity with other unions across the world who are representing the same workers in the same companies. There's a lot we can learn from labor rights in Europe in particular. And there are many companies that we represent here in the U.S. that began with strong labor rights and a collective bargaining agreement in Europe, but none here. And the fact that they were treating U.S. workers differently really ended up being a big messaging point for both for workers, but as well as their shareholders and eventually the company. And so strategically, that's been something that's been really, really helpful. And even with Amazon, there's definitely a global network around Amazon that we're definitely a part of, and we're learning from each other and just doing solidarity actions and really supporting each other's work as we try to hold the company accountable and lift up workers' rights in their facilities.
Yeah, I think it's such an interesting point about the international role. I mean, both the companies that you're organizing at are major international companies, and we find these very different statuses of unions and labor law in the different countries. I was thinking about an eCornell course I created that we do for practicing managers, that explaining that if you have to, like how if you're operating in, say, Germany with a very different labor law structure with sectoral bargaining, you have to do things very differently. You can't do things the same way that you do in the United States. And even, when we're teaching our courses around labor relations, we have to put that proviso in that what you do in America may not be what you can do if you're over in Europe or in other settings. I think, one thing that's really interesting from this whole conversation is that it's showing how important these debates we're having about labor law and the structure for representing workers is. This really just isn't theoretical stuff when we think about something like the PRO Act and what the Biden administration's labor policy is going to be. I mean, it really does very directly affect the workers that you're organizing, Jessica, your union at Bessemer, and what it's going to be like working in an Amazon facility. And Chewy, to what you've talked about at Google, I think it puts a question out there that we can't just have kind of rose-tinted glasses about thinking about what the world of work is going to be like and assume it's going to work out. It's a choice we have to make as us as Americans about what labor is going to be like and what work is going to be like as we go forward. So I do want to thank both of you for sharing your insights. They've been fascinating comments, and I'm sure our audience has learned a lot from them. So thank you both, Jessica and Chewy.
Could I also speak just real quick to one other thing that I'm working on? I'm also, aside from this, working on a fund with coworker.org. It's at coworkerfund.org, where what we're trying to do is help other groups and other companies who are also trying to organize tech labor. And so we are giving stipends directly to activists and organizers who are doing something to try to make a meaningful difference in their workplaces. We've, at this point, given out stipends to, I believe, about 30 different people spread out through different types of roles within the industry, some white collar, some in the more blue collar roles. And we're looking for more donations, as well as once we are able to kind of refill some of that pot, then to start giving to more activists. And so we'll be looking for more applicants there as well.
Yeah, thanks. And coworker.org, for those who don't know, it is one of the more interesting innovations in the online labor space. So, something that maybe a future webinar will talk about that too. We do have another webinar in our Future of Work, Labor in America series coming up on April 22nd with Randy Weingarten, the president of the American Federation of Teachers. Obviously a very important sector right now, a lot of discussion around that. So look forward to that session, but I want to thank again Jessica and Chewy for a fascinating conversation today, and thanks to our audience for joining us.